Room 306 was exactly what I expected. Small, outdated, and reeking of stale cigarette smoke. The wallpaper was peeling at the corners and the carpet had stains I didn't want to think about. A single dim lamp flickered beside the bed, casting weak yellow light over the room. I tossed my bag onto the chair, sat on the bed, and sighed. It wasn't great, but it would do. By the time I had showered and changed into an old t-shirt, it was close to midnight. I crawled into bed, pulled the covers up, and stared at the ceiling. It had water stains shaped like faces. That's when I heard it. A soft tapping sound. It was faint, barely audible, but rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up, listening. The sound was coming from the wall behind the bed. I frowned. Maybe it was the pipes? Or someone in the next room. I pressed my ear against the wall. Silence. I waited a moment longer before lying back down. Tap, tap, tap. I shot up again. This time it was louder, closer. It was coming from inside the room. A chill crawled up my spine. I turned on the lamp and scanned the room. Nothing. The door was still locked. The closet was empty. The bathroom was silent. I exhaled, shaking my head. Just my imagination. I had been tired, stressed. I was in a new place, an unfamiliar environment. My mind was playing tricks on me. I turned off the lamp and lay back down. The tapping stopped, and then a whisper. Faint, almost like a breath against my ear. Leave. I bolted upright, heart hammering. My hand shot for the lamp, but before I could turn it on, the tapping returned, louder this time. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from inside the closet. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The closet door stood slightly open, just enough to see the darkness beyond. And then, in the sliver of darkness, I saw something move. A shape, a shadow. It was watching me. I scrambled out of bed, grabbing my phone. My hands shook as I turned on the flashlight and pointed it at the closet. The light cut through the darkness, but there was nothing there. The closet was empty. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my breathing ragged. Then, hesitantly, I stepped forward and yanked the closet door fully open. Nothing. Just an empty space. A few wire hangers swaying slightly as if something had just been there. I laughed shakily. I'm losing my mind. Leaving the closet open, I climbed back into bed. I didn't turn off the lamp this time. I left it on, bathing the room in its weak, flickering glow. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept staring at the open closet, waiting. But the tapping never returned, and neither did the whisper. For that night, at least. The next morning, I convinced myself it had all been a dream. Maybe I had been half asleep, trapped in that strange space between wakefulness and dreaming. I spent most of the day at work, trying not to think about it. By the time I returned to the motel that evening, the sun had already set. The hallway to my room was dimly lit, the flickering light above my door buzzing softly. I hesitated before unlocking the door. Something felt off. The air inside was wrong, stale, heavy, like someone had been inside, standing in the darkness, waiting. I swallowed the lump in my throat and stepped inside, locking the door behind me. Everything looked the same. The bed was still unmade from the night before. My bag sat untouched in the chair. The closet door was still open. I exhaled. It's fine. It was just a weird night. I went about my routine, shower, change, check my phone. Midnight crept closer, and despite my unease, exhaustion weighed me down. This time I left the closet open on purpose. I needed to prove to myself there was nothing there. I turned off the lamp and lay down, listening. Silence. Minutes passed, then an hour. Nothing. I started to relax. Maybe I had imagined it all. And then, a sound. Not a tap, not a whisper, a slow, creaking noise, like the sound of a door. Closing. I shot up and turned on the light. My heart stopped. The closet door which I had left open was now shut, and from the other side came a long, dragging scratch, My body refused to move. I sat frozen, staring at the closed closet door, my pulse pounding in my ears. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as if something unseen was pressing down on me. Another scratch, long and slow like fingernails scraping against wood. I forced myself to swallow, my throat dry. This wasn't the building settling. It wasn't my imagination. Something was in there. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I turned on the flashlight. The bright beam wavered as I pointed it at the closet door. "Hello?" My voice came out barely above a whisper. Silence. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. Nothing. I exhaled shakily and swung my legs off the bed, planting my feet on the cold floor. My body felt like it was moving on its own, every rational part of my brain screaming at me to stop. I took slow, careful steps toward the closet. The beam of my flashlight locked on the door. Another scratch. This time, right at my ear level. I nearly dropped the phone. I reached for the doorknob with a trembling hand, fingers barely brushing against the cold metal. A loud knock came from inside. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. Number not just a knock, 3 knocks, rhythmic, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. The same sound I had heard the night before. I backed up until I hit the bed, my legs refusing to support me. My mind raced through every possible explanation, but none of them made sense. The motel was nearly empty. There was no one in the room next to mine, and even if there had been, the closet didn't connect to anything. It was just a shallow space with one entrance. The knocks came again. Tap, 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 louder. I couldn't breathe. My hands were slick with sweat. Then from inside the closet, I heard it. A voice. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was something deeper, guttural. A low murmur. Words just beyond recognition, spoken in a tone that sent ice through my veins. My body moved before my brain could catch up. I grabbed my keys and my wallet and bolted for the door. The moment I flung it open, the motel hallway felt like salvation. The fluorescent lights buzzed above me, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. But I didn't care. I slammed the door behind me and nearly ran down the hall. The front desk was empty. The night clerk was gone. I leaned against the counter, trying to steady my breath. "Hello?" My voice cracked. "Anyone here?" Nothing. I turned toward the entrance. The glass doors reflected my pale face, wide eyes, my disheveled hair. Beyond them, the parking lot was empty except for my car and a single flickering streetlight. I was alone. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around. No one was there. The silence pressed in on me, suffocating. I took a slow step toward the hallway leading back to the rooms. Then I heard it. A door clicking open. Soft footsteps, and a quiet, familiar sound. Tap, tap, tap. I turned and ran. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. My hands fumbled with the keys, slick with sweat as I jammed them into the lock. The second I threw myself inside, I slammed the door shut and hit the locks. My breath came in ragged gasps. I forced myself to look up at the motel. The hallway was empty. The front desk still abandoned. But something felt wrong. The windows on the second floor, right where my room was, seemed darker than the rest, like they were swallowing the weak glow of the hallway lights. Then I saw it. A shadow in my window. It stood perfectly still, just behind the glass, barely visible in the dim light. A shape. Human, but wrong. It wasn't moving. It was watching. I turned the key in the ignition. The car roared to life and I threw it into reverse, tires screeching against the pavement as I sped out of the parking lot. I didn't stop driving for miles. The highway stretched out in front of me, empty and endless, lined with nothing but towering pines and the occasional road sign. I had no idea where I was going. I just needed to be away from that place. My pulse was still hammering when I pulled over at an all-night diner, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I forced myself to take slow, deep breaths, my mind racing. I needed answers. Pulling out my phone, I typed the motel's name into the search bar. Hollow Pines Inn. A few results popped up, some travel sites, a handful of reviews, nothing unusual. But as I scrolled further, an older article caught my eye. Local motel shut down after mysterious disappearances. My stomach tightened. I tapped the link. The article was dated 10 years ago. It described a series of unexplained events at the Hollow Pines Inn, guests checking in but never checking out, strange noises reported in the rooms, staff quitting without notice. The motel had been shut down for a time due to safety concerns, but the part that made my blood run cold was a single paragraph buried near the end of the article. Authorities searched the premises after the final reported disappearance, but no evidence of foul play was found. However, during the investigation, officers noted that room 306 appeared untouched, despite being unoccupied for years. The closet door was found ajar, and inside, scrawled on the back wall in what appeared to be blood, were the words, "Let me out." I dropped my phone. My body felt ice cold. Room 306. The same room I had just stayed in. The same closet. The same knocking. I looked back toward my car, heart hammering, half expecting to see that shadowy figure standing just outside the diner's glass doors, watching. But the parking lot was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't really escaped, that whatever was in that room had followed me. I didn't sleep that night. Even in the brightly lit diner surrounded by the quiet hum of late-night truckers and exhausted waitresses, I felt its presence. Like a weight pressing against my chest, a whisper at the edge of my thoughts. I kept my back to the window. Every time I glanced at my reflection in the glass, I expected to see something standing behind me. By dawn, I had convinced myself I was being paranoid. It had to be some elaborate trick of my mind. Stress, exhaustion, maybe even some kind of waking nightmare. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I knew what I had heard, what I had seen, and I knew I couldn't ignore it. I needed to go back. The thought sent a fresh wave of dread through me, but I had no choice. If I ran now, I would never stop running. I needed to face whatever was in that room. I pulled out my phone again and searched for the motel's number. There was no listing, no website, no contact information. Just that old article and a handful of outdated reviews. Like the place didn't officially exist anymore. I clenched my jaw and made a decision. I was going back. By the time I arrived at Hollow Pines Inn, the morning sun had risen high, casting long shadows over the parking lot. It looked almost normal in daylight, faded, run down, but not sinister. Still, my stomach twisted as I stepped out of the car. The front desk was empty, just like the night before. The key rack on the wall was covered in dust except for one empty hook. Room 306. I took a slow breath and walked back up the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the silent hallway. When I reached my door, I hesitated. The handle was slightly turned, not enough to open the door, but just enough to suggest that someone, or something, had tried. I swallowed hard and pushed it open. The room looked exactly the same. Bed unmade. My bag still sitting in the chair. The closet door closed. The air felt wrong. Heavy. Charged. Like the static before a storm. I stepped inside, leaving the door open behind me. I forced myself toward the closet. My legs felt stiff, my skin prickling as I reached out and wrapped my fingers around the doorknob. I turned it. The door creaked open. The closet was empty, just like before. Just an ordinary space with nothing but a single wire hanger dangling from the rod. I let out a slow breath. Maybe I had imagined it after all. Then I saw it. Faint, nearly invisible in the dim light. Scratches. Dozens of them. Long, uneven lines carved into the wooden floor. Some deep, some shallow. Like something had been dragged. Or like someone had been clawing their way out. My breath hitched. I stepped closer, and that's when I noticed the writing. Scrawled on the back wall, nearly faded with time, was a message. Not the one from the article, not "let me out." This one was different. This one was fresh. "Why did you come back?" A breath of cold air rushed past me, and behind me the closet door slammed shut. Darkness swallowed me. The closet door had slammed so hard the walls seemed to shake, sending a dull echo through the small room. My breath caught in my throat as I spun, reaching for the knob. It wouldn't budge. I pounded on the door. "Hey, let me out!" Silence. The air inside was thick, suffocating. A damp, stale smell clung to the walls, something old and rotten like wet wood and decay. My fingers fumbled in the dark as I pulled my phone from my pocket. I turned on the flashlight. The moment the beam of light cut through the black, I wished I hadn't. The closet was deeper than I remembered, much deeper. The space behind me should have been no more than a few feet of empty wall, but now the back of the closet stretched into an impossibly long, narrow corridor, disappearing into the dark. The wooden floor beneath my feet looked different too. Older, rougher, covered in more scratches. Some of them fresh. Something had been in here. Something had tried to get out. A whisper floated through the air, soft, almost gentle. "You shouldn't have come back." My stomach lurched. The voice hadn't come from in front of me. It had come from behind me. I whipped around, the phone shaking in my grip as I aimed the flashlight toward the darkness. The corridor stretched further, endless, like it had no end. My breathing turned ragged. I wasn't alone. A faint sound echoed through the hallway. Footsteps, slow, measured, moving toward me. The light flickered. I backed up against the closet door, my fingers clawing at the knob. "Let me out," my voice cracked. "Somebody, please." The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed against me like a weight. Then, from the darkness, something moved. A shape, a figure, impossibly tall, its limbs wrong, shifting as it stepped closer. The dim light caught a glimpse of its face. No, not a face. A hole where a face should have been. And then it ran. Straight toward me. I screamed, throwing myself against the door, pounding until my hands ached. The air turned ice cold. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. The thing was almost on me. At the last second, the door behind me flew open. I tumbled backward, hitting the floor hard. The light from the motel room burned into my vision, too bright after the suffocating darkness. I scrambled to my feet and spun toward the closet. It was empty. The corridor was gone. Just a shallow, ordinary space with peeling wallpaper and a single broken hanger. I staggered back, my entire body trembling. My phone was still clutched in my fist, the flashlight beaming uselessly at the floor. My lungs burned from holding my breath. It was over. Or at least I thought it was. Then I saw my reflection in the motel mirror. And behind me, standing just inside the closet, was a shadow. Watching. Waiting. Smiling. I didn't turn around. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to bolt out of that room and never look back. But my body wouldn't move. My breath hitched in my throat as I stared at the mirror, at the thing standing just behind me in the open closet. It wasn't just a shadow, it was tall, unnaturally thin, its limbs stretched just a little too long. The face, or what should have been a face, was shrouded in darkness. But I could feel its gaze on me. And worse, it was smiling. Not with a mouth, not with eyes. But I felt the grin deep in my bones, as if it were curling through my mind. My fingers twitched. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with something I couldn't name. The reflection wavered, just slightly, like a ripple on the surface of water. Then, the thing tilted its head. Not a slow, natural movement, a sharp, sudden jerk, like it had just noticed something, like it had just noticed me. And then, it moved. I didn't see it step forward. I didn't see its limbs shift. One second it was inside the closet. The next, it was behind me. A cold breath slid across my neck. My body finally obeyed. I threw myself forward, crashing into the dresser and knocking the lamp to the floor. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering against my ribs. The closet door slammed shut. Behind me, the entire room seemed to pulse. The air hummed, an unnatural vibration that made my ears ring. My vision blurred for a moment, like the walls were stretching, warping, breathing. I bolted for the door. My hands fumbled with the lock. I yanked it open and stumbled into the hallway, nearly falling to my knees. Silence. The air outside the room was still, stale, thick with the smell of dust and something faintly metallic. The motel hallway stretched before me, empty, the flickering ceiling lights casting sickly yellow pools on the worn carpet. I turned back. Room 306 stood there, door wide open, light spilling into the hall. The closet was shut. No sign of the thing I had just seen. But I knew. I knew. It was still there, waiting, watching. I took a shaky step backward. I needed to leave. Now I turned and stopped. At the end of the hallway, near the stairwell, someone was standing. Not the shadow, a man, thin, motionless, dressed in dark clothes. His head was tilted slightly to the side, just enough for me to notice. And though his features were half hidden in the dim light, I recognized him. My stomach twisted. It was the motel clerk, the same hollow-cheeked man who had given me the key 2 nights ago. He hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, just stood there staring. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. Then finally he raised a hand and pointed, not at me, at the open door behind me, at room 306. My blood turned to ice. Slowly, stiffly, he shook his head, a small, deliberate movement. Then he turned and walked down the stairs, disappearing from view. I didn't follow. I didn't want to know what he meant. I didn't want to know what would happen if I stepped back into that room. I ran. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys, my breath ragged and uneven. The early morning air was damp, thick with the scent of wet pavement and pine. I could still feel the weight of the motel behind me, like it was watching, like it was waiting. I didn't look back. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My fingers were slick with sweat as I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered, once, twice, then roared to life. I pressed my foot down on the gas. The tires screeched against the asphalt as I peeled out of the parking lot, leaving Hollow Pines Inn behind me. I didn't slow down. Not for miles. Only when I was far enough away, when the motel was just a distant nightmare in my rearview mirror, did I finally let myself breathe. But the air still felt wrong. I drove until the sun fully crested the horizon, until the pale morning light washed over the road, making the world feel solid again. The motel had been swallowed by distance, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't let me go, that something had followed me. I pulled into a gas station just off the highway. The neon "Open 24 Hours" sign buzzed faintly as I stepped out of the car, my legs unsteady. Inside, the cashier barely glanced up as I grabbed a bottle of water and made my way to the counter. He was young, maybe early 20s, with dark circles under his eyes and a name tag that read, Lucas. I hesitated before speaking. "Hey," I said, voice hoarse. "You ever heard of a place called Hollow Pines Inn?" Lucas frowned, setting down the magazine he'd been flipping through. "Yeah. Why? You know anything about it?" He gave a dry, humorless chuckle. "More than I want to. That place is cursed, man." I swallowed. "What do you mean?" Lucas leaned against the counter. "It's been there forever, but no one stays long. People check in and weird stuff happens. Some leave in the middle of the night, others..." He trailed off, rubbing the back of his neck. "Others what?" He shook his head. "They don't leave at all. A chill ran down my spine. "You ever been inside?" I asked. "Once," he admitted. "Years ago. Some friends and I dared each other to go in. I didn't make it past the front desk." "Why not?" Lucas exhaled sharply like he didn't want to say it out loud. "I saw something in the mirror behind the desk. It was me, but..." He paused. It wasn't. A cold, sinking feeling settled in my gut. I knew exactly what he meant. I set the money down on the counter and grabbed the water, my hands still unsteady. "Be careful," Lucas said as I turned to leave. I didn't respond, because deep down, I knew it was too late for that. Something had already noticed me, and it wasn't going to stop. And it wasn't. I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The gas station felt safe, its fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the occasional car pulling in and out of the lot. But no matter how far I drove, no matter how much distance I put between myself and that motel, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wanting with me. I checked the rearview mirror. Just my reflection. But that didn't mean I was alone. The thought made my stomach twist. I needed answers. I pulled out my phone and searched for more information about Hollow Pines Inn. There wasn't much. The same old articles, a few mentions in forums dedicated to urban legends, a handful of posts from people who claimed to have stayed there, all saying the same thing: strange noises, missing time, nightmares, and something in the mirrors. One post caught my eye. It was from an anonymous user dated 5 years ago. The message was short. "If you're reading this, get out. Don't stay in room 306. Don't look into the mirrors. And if you hear the knocking, never, ever open the door." My blood ran cold. I turned off my phone and started the car. I had to keep moving. I drove aimlessly for hours, stopping only when exhaustion forced me to. I found another cheap motel off the highway, one that looked normal, and checked in without asking questions. The room was small, clean, utterly unremarkable. I locked the door, shoved a chair under the handle for good measure, and collapsed onto the bed. I didn't plan to sleep, but my body had other ideas. At some point I drifted off. I don't know how long I was out before something woke me. Tap, tap, tap. My eyes snapped open. I lay frozen, every nerve in my body on edge. The sound had been faint, distant. I told myself it was just the wind, just the building settling. Then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. Louder this time. My pulse pounded in my ears. I turned my head, slowly, toward the door. The chair was still there. The lock was still in place. The knocking hadn't come from the door. It had come from inside the room. My breath hitched. My eyes darted to the closet. It was shut, but my gut told me that wasn't where the sound had come from. Slowly, I turned toward the bathroom. The door was open just a crack, darkness spilling out into the room. And in the mirror above the sink, I saw something move. Not a reflection. Something else. Something wrong. A shadowy shape, shifting, stretching, growing taller. Then it turned, and I realized it wasn't in the mirror. It was standing behind me. My body locked up. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The shape in the mirror was growing sharper, more defined. Not just a shadow anymore. A figure. It was standing right behind me. I wanted to run, but my body refused to move. Every muscle was frozen, locked in place by a deep primal terror I had never felt before. The air in the room had changed. It was thick now, pressing against my skin, buzzing with something unseen. A low, distant hum filled my ears, growing louder with each passing second. In the mirror, the figure tilted its head, just like the thing in the closet. And then, it stepped closer. I couldn't move. I couldn't blink. I could only watch as it reached toward me, its long, twisted fingers stretching out, hovering just inches from my shoulder. My breath hitched. Then it smiled. Not with a mouth, not with lips or teeth, but with its entire body. A shift in the darkness, a terrible curling of something unseen, as if it was bending the very space around it into something unnatural, something wrong. And then right in my ear I heard it. A whisper, low, jagged, and what a familiar. "You brought me with you." The light in the room flickered, and suddenly I could move again. I threw myself off the bed, hitting the floor hard, my elbow slamming against the nightstand. Pain shot up my arm, but I didn't stop. I scrambled toward the door, yanking at the lock, kicking the chair out of the way. My fingers were clumsy, shaking so badly I could barely grip the handle. Behind me, the humming grew louder. The air shifted. Something moved. I wrenched the door open and stumbled into the hallway. The motel was silent. No voices, no TV murmuring behind thin walls, no distant sound of cars passing on the highway. Nothing. I ran, down the hallway, past the front desk, out into the night. The parking lot was empty. My car. I needed my car. I sprinted across the pavement, fumbling with the keys in my pocket. My pulse thundered in my ears, then I felt it. That same cold breath on the back of my neck. I didn't turn around. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely shove the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. The headlights flared, illuminating the empty parking lot. Except, it wasn't empty. A shape stood at the edge of the light, just beyond the reach of my high beams. Tall, motionless, watching. I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires screeched against the pavement as I peeled out of the lot, my heart hammering, my breath ragged. The figure in the mirror grew smaller and smaller, until it vanished completely. I drove, and drove, and drove. I didn't stop until the sky turned gray with the first light of dawn. But even as the sun rose, even as the world around me felt normal again, I knew it was still with me. And it always would be. I didn't go home. I kept driving, moving from town to town, sleeping in my car when I had to, never staying in one place too long. But no matter how far I ran, no matter how much distance I put between myself and that motel, I could feel it. Watching. Waiting. It never showed itself outright, but I caught glimpses. A shape in the corner of my eye, gone when I turned my head. A reflection in a storefront window that didn't match my movements. A shadow lingering just outside the glow of a streetlight, stretching toward me as if it wanted to pull me in. And the knocking, always at night. Tap, 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 at motel doors, car windows, even cheap apartment walls, when I was desperate enough to try staying in one place. It didn't matter where I went, it always found me. Weeks passed like that, maybe months. I lost track of time. Sleep became something I feared. The more exhausted I became, the closer it got. Then one night I made a mistake. I stopped at a roadside diner somewhere off the highway. I was too tired to keep going, and for once I just wanted to sit somewhere that felt normal. The place was nearly empty, just an old man in the corner nursing a cup of coffee and a tired waitress who barely looked at me when she handed me a menu. I sat by the window, trying not to let my hands shake as I reached for the coffee she placed in front of me. Then, something in the glass caught my attention. A reflection. At first, I thought it was just my own, but the longer I looked, the more I realized it wasn't. The shape in the glass sat perfectly still even when I moved. Not a reflection, a presence. It was here. I turned my head slowly, heart pounding. The diner was empty. The old man had left. The waitress was gone. I was alone. The lights above flickered. The air grew heavy. Then, just as the silence became unbearable, I heard it. A whisper. Software familiar. "You can't run forever." I bolted. Out the door. Into the night. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. My hands fumbled with the keys, heart hammering so hard I thought my ribs might crack. I wrenched the door open, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut. The world outside was empty. The diner dark, lifeless, as if it had never been open at all. Then, in the mirror, I saw it. Not behind me. Inside the car. A grin stretching wide in the darkness. And then tap, tap, tap on the inside of the window. I couldn't scream. The sound caught in my throat, strangled by pure terror. My body refused to move, every muscle frozen in place as I stared at the reflection in the glass. It was inside the car with me, a shape barely visible in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. Its form was twisted, wrong, shifting like a shadow cast by something that wasn't really there. No eyes, no mouth, just the sensation of being watched. Tap, tap, tap. The knocking came again, slow and deliberate. But the sound wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from the mirror. I didn't want to look. I had to. My gaze flickered toward the rearview mirror, breath trapped in my lungs. At first, I saw nothing. Then, a hand. Rising up from the darkness in the back seat, long fingers curling over the headrest behind me. Not a human hand, too thin, too long. The skin, if it even had skin, was stretched too tight over bones that jutted out at unnatural angles. It was reaching for me. My body finally obeyed. I slammed the car into drive, tires screeching against the pavement as I sped away from the diner. The thing in the mirror didn't move. It just watched. Its shape flickering like a bad signal, shifting between something almost human and something so much worse. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred, hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The road ahead was empty, stretching into darkness. I pressed the gas pedal harder. Then from the back seat, a whisper, right against my ear. "You brought me with you." Cold air rushed over my skin, and for a split second, I felt something press against my shoulder. I lost control. The car swerved violently. Tires screeched. The world spun in a blur of headlights and asphalt. I don't remember the impact, just the deafening crash, the crunch of metal, the sensation of weightlessness before everything went black. Then, silence. I woke up to flashing red and blue lights, voices, hands pulling me from the wreckage, someone saying I was lucky to be alive. The paramedics asked me questions, but I barely heard them. My eyes kept drifting to the shattered windshield, to the empty back seat, to the side mirror, cracked but still intact, and in its broken reflection, a shadow, watching, waiting, smiling. I didn't tell them. Not the paramedics, not the cops, not the doctor at the hospital who stitched the gash on my forehead and told me I had a mild concussion. What could I even say? That I crashed my car because something was in the back seat? That I had been running from a motel room where the closet didn't obey the laws of space and time? That a shadow was following me? No one would believe me. So I lied. Said I fell asleep at the wheel. That I had been driving too long, too tired. That I didn't remember what happened before the crash. And they believed me. They let me go after a night of observation, handing me a few painkillers and a warning to take it easy. I stepped out of the hospital at dawn, squinting against the morning light. The town was small, unfamiliar. A handful of cars passed on the quiet streets. Everything looked normal. But I knew better. I knew it was still with me. Even now, as I stood outside the hospital, I could feel it. That wrongness always in the air, just out of reach. The sensation of something watching from the corners where shadows stretched too far. I couldn't keep running. I needed answers. I took a bus to the nearest library. My phone had been shattered in the crash, but I didn't need it. I needed old records. Newspaper archives. Anything that might tell me what the hell Hollow Pines Inn really was. The librarian, an older woman with tired eyes, barely glanced at me when I asked for information on the motel. "You're not the first," she muttered, leading me to a row of dusty file cabinets. People come looking, but they don't always like what they find. I swallowed hard. What happened there? She gave me a strange look, as if deciding whether or not to tell me. Then finally, she sighed. "It's been abandoned for years," she said. "At least it should be. That place has a history: murders, disappearances, people checking in and never checking out." My stomach twisted. I knew that already. I had read the articles. But then she added something else. "It was built on an older foundation," she said, lowering her voice. "No one knows what was there before, but the land, it's wrong. Something about that place doesn't let go." Her words sent a chill through me. She turned away, as if that was all she was willing to say. But I wasn't done. I spent hours going through old newspapers, flipping through faded pages, following every lead. Most of the records were just as I expected: missing persons reports, strange police logs, scattered rumors. But then I found something older, a report from 1963, a fire. The article was short, just a few paragraphs about a boarding house that had burned down, on the exact same land where Hollow Pines Inn now stood. The cause was never determined. The owner had been found inside a closet, burnt beyond recognition. The strange part? The closet door had been locked from the inside. My pulse pounded as I kept reading. There was a name buried in the article, barely legible through the faded ink. William Grayson. I didn't recognize it, but something about it sent a shiver down my spine. I grabbed a few more records, digging further. And that's when I found it. An obituary. William Grayson, age unknown, owner of Grayson Boarding House, believed to have perished in the fire, though no one could explain why the flames had been contained to a single room. Underneath was a grainy black and white photo. A man. Thin, hollow-cheeked, deep, sunken eyes. I stared at the picture, my breath catching in my throat, because I knew that face. I had seen it before. At the front desk of Hollow Pines Inn, the motel clerk, the man who gave me my key, the man who tried to warn me. I slammed the file shut, my pulse hammering in my ears. It didn't make sense. The motel clerk, William Grayson, had died in a fire over 60 years ago. And yet, I had seen him, spoken to him. He had handed me the key to room 306. A deep, sickening realization settled in my gut. He hadn't been working at Hollow Pines Inn. He had been trapped there. I shoved the files back into the cabinet, my hands shaking. The librarian gave me a knowing glance as I rushed past her out into the cold afternoon air. I needed to leave. I needed to forget. But something stopped me. A single thought worming its way into my mind. What if Grayson had been trying to help me? What if he had wanted me to find this, and if he was a prisoner in that place, then what the hell had I brought with me? The thought sent ice through my veins. I had to end this. I had to go back. The drive felt different this time. No fear, no hesitation, just a quiet, gnawing dread curling in my stomach. By the time I pulled into the Hollow Pines parking lot, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. The neon vacancy sign still buzzed in the window, flickering weakly, like the place had been waiting for me. I stepped out of the car, my breath visible in the cold evening air. The motel loomed ahead, dark and silent. The front desk was empty. No sign of Grayson, just the key rack on the wall, coated in dust. Every key was hanging in place, except for one. Room 306. My mouth went dry. I turned toward the stairwell, my footsteps eerily loud in the stillness. I reached the door. It was already open. The room looked exactly the same. The stained carpet, the flickering lamp, the bed, still unmade from the night I had fled, and the closet door, closed, waiting. I swallowed hard, my fingers clenched into fists. This ends tonight. I stepped inside. The air was heavy, thick with something unseen. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt it. The presence. I wasn't alone. A deep humming filled my ears, vibrating through my bones. Tap, tap, tap. The sound echoed through the room. I turned toward the closet. The door was slowly opening. Darkness stretched beyond it. No back wall, no end. Just an endless void, pulsing with something ancient and hungry. And in that darkness, it was waiting. Tall, twisted, smiling. A voice, jagged and broken, slithered through the air. You came back. The floor shook. The walls shuddered. The thing moved. And then the closet door slammed shut. The humming stopped. Silence. I stood there, chest heaving, my body drenched in sweat. The air was still. The room was normal, like nothing had happened. My eyes darted to the mirror. I was alone. But I knew the truth. The closet wasn't empty. It never had been, and it never would be. I left that night. I never looked back. The Hollow Pines Inn burned to the ground 2 weeks later. No official cause, no known fire source, just ashes. And one thing that sent a shiver through my spine when I read the report, the only part of the building that remained untouched? Room 306. The closet door was still closed, but the inside was empty. And I knew it was somewhere else now, waiting, watching for someone new. I tried to move on. I told myself it was over. The motel was gone, burned to nothing but a footnote in the town's history. Whatever had been inside, it was gone too. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. It had never been about the motel. The place was just a doorway, a passage, and I had opened it. I went back to my life, or at least I tried to. I found a new apartment in a different city, far from Hollow Pines. I changed my number, got a new job, surrounded myself with normalcy. Weeks passed, then months, and for a while, it worked, until the knocking started again. Tap, tap, tap. The first time, I convinced myself it was the pipes. The second time, I blamed the neighbors. The third time, I didn't have an excuse. I had been sitting in my apartment, the TV on, a half-eaten dinner in front of me when it came. Tap, tap, tap. Not at the door, not at the window. From the closet. I froze, my body locking up with the same paralyzing fear I had felt in room 306. The air in my apartment changed, the same pressure, the same static hum vibrating at the edge of my hearing. I turned my head slowly. The closet door was shut. I hadn't opened it in weeks. I stared at it, heart hammering, waiting for something to happen. For the handle to turn, for the door to creak open, for someone to step out. But nothing did. Minutes passed, then an hour. Finally, I forced myself to stand. My legs felt weak, unsteady. I took slow, careful steps toward the closet, barely breathing. My fingers hovered over the doorknob. I had a choice. I could open it, face whatever was on the other side, or I could walk away. My chest ached with the weight of that decision. I reached for the knob. Then, my phone buzzed. The sound shattered the silence, making me jump. I stumbled back, heart racing, then fumbled for the phone in my pocket. A text message from an unknown number. 4 words. Don't open the door. My stomach twisted. I turned back to the closet. The knocking had stopped, but something told me it hadn't left. Something told me it never would. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the closet, my phone still clutched in my hand. The message was still there. Don't open the door. I wanted to reply. I wanted to ask, who sent this? How do they know? What happens if I do? But I didn't, because deep down I already knew the answer. I had seen what was on the other side before. Morning came, dull and gray. The apartment felt different, emptier, like something had left. I didn't trust it. I went about my day pretending everything was normal. Coffee, work, conversations that felt distant, like I was watching myself from the outside. But in the back of my mind, I was waiting. Waiting for the knock. Waiting for it. That night, I locked the closet. Then I moved the dresser in front of it just in case. My body ached with exhaustion, but I refused to sleep. Sometime after midnight, my phone buzzed again. A second message. It's still there. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. My fingers trembled as I typed a reply. Who is this? No response. A long silence stretched through the room, then tap, tap, tap from inside the closet. I shot up, my entire body rigid with fear. The dresser didn't move, the door didn't open, but the knocking continued. Tap, tap, tap. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and typed another message. What does it want? This time, the reply came instantly. You. A chill crawled up my spine. The knocking stopped. And then, the doorknob turned. The doorknob rattled once, then again, slow, deliberate, testing. I pressed myself against the far wall, my phone clutched in my hands, every muscle in my body locked in place. The dresser still blocked the door. It shouldn't have been able to move, but it was moving. Not by inches, not by force, by shifting. The wood groaned as if something was pressing through it. Like the door and dresser weren't barriers at all, just thin layers between me and whatever was on the other side. My phone buzzed. Another message. Don't look. I squeezed my eyes shut. A faint whisper slithered through the room. Not words, not a voice, just a presence, like something leaning too close, like a breath against my ear. Cold air brushed the back of my neck. I wasn't alone anymore. My hands clenched around my phone. I forced myself to move, to do something. I turned. The closet door was open. The dresser hadn't moved. The lock was still in place, but the door was open anyway. Darkness stretched beyond it, deep, endless, like a tunnel that shouldn't exist. And something was inside, not just watching, waiting. I stepped back, heart hammering, every instinct screaming at me to run. My phone buzzed again. It knows you're afraid. My breath hitched. Then, a hand had reached out from the darkness. Not a normal hand. Fingers too long, skin stretched too tight. The shape was barely visible, flickering, shifting like something that wasn't fully in this world yet, and it was reaching for me. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on the edge of the bed. My body hit the floor hard, pain jolting up my spine. The thing in the closet unmoved. I scrambled to my feet, my pulse roaring in my ears. I ran, out of the bedroom, through the apartment. I didn't stop to grab anything. I didn't stop to look back. I threw open the front door and bolted into the hallway, gasping for breath. The air out here felt lighter, as if I had just stepped out of a pressure chamber. My phone buzzed one last time. I looked down. A final message. You should have never come back. Double asterisk. I didn't go back inside. I couldn't. I stood in the dimly lit hallway, my breath ragged, my heart hammering against my ribs. The apartment door was still wide open behind me, the soft glow from the ceiling light spilling into the corridor. But the space beyond the doorway felt wrong, like a mouth waiting for me to step back inside so it could swallow me whole. I checked my phone again. The last message was still there. You should have never come back. I didn't recognize the number. I tried calling it. A long pause, then static. Not the kind you get from bad reception. This was different. It wasn't just white noise. It was layers of sound. A faint hum, a whisper beneath it, A voice trying to speak but warped, stretched, or wrong. My stomach twisted. I hung up. I needed to leave. Now I turned and sprinted down the hallway, taking the stairs 2 at a time. The front lobby was empty, the flickering neon sign in the window casting strange shadows across the floor. Outside, the cold night air hit me like a slap. I barely registered it. My only thought was getting as far away as possible. I reached my car, fumbling with the keys. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped them. I bent down to grab them, and then I saw it. The back seat. Something was sitting there. I couldn't see its face. Just a shape. A shadow that didn't belong, darker than the night itself. Watching, waiting, smiling. I staggered backward, nearly falling onto the pavement. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body refused to move. The car door was still locked. I forced myself to breathe. If it was still inside, if it was trapped in the reflection door, then maybe. A quiet click-sarn broke the silence. The car unlocked itself. The dome light flickered on, casting a dim glow over the empty seats. Nothing was there. But I knew. It wanted me to get inside. I turned and ran. I didn't stop running until my lungs burned. The city blurred around me, streetlights flickering overhead, the distant hum of cars passing on empty roads. I had no idea where I was going. All I knew was that I had to keep moving. I ended up at a Palm bus station. It was mostly empty at this hour, just a few people scattered across the rows of plastic chairs, lost in their own worlds. A tired-looking woman cradled a sleeping child. A man in a hoodie scrolled through his phone. An elderly couple sat in silence, staring at nothing. None of them looked at me. I didn't care where the next bus was headed. I just needed to go. I bought a ticket with shaky hands and took a seat in the back, pressing myself against the window. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering in and out of sync with my pulse. My phone buzzed. I hesitated before looking. A new message. You can't run. A chill crawled up my spine. I gripped the phone so tightly my fingers ached. The bus engine rumbled to life. The doors hissed shut. We pulled away from the station, the city slipping into darkness behind us. For the first time in hours, I felt a flicker of relief. Maybe I was safe. Maybe I had left Dawn behind. The bus was quiet. The rhythmic hum of the tires against the road was almost soothing. My body ached with exhaustion, my eyelids growing heavy despite my fear. I told myself I'd just rest for a moment, just for a second. I drifted. Somewhere between waking and sleep, I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. I jolted upright, heart pounding. The bus was still moving. The other passengers were still there. But something was wrong. The lights overhead had dimmed, flickering like a dying candle. Outside the window, nothing. No streetlights, no cars, no city, just an endless stretch of darkness. The road was gone. The bus driver sat motionless, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. Too still, too silent. I swallowed hard, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My phone buzzed again. A single word. Look. I didn't want to. I'd had to. Slowly, I turned my head and saw the mirror passengers. They weren't people anymore. They sat unnaturally still, their heads tilted at sharp, impossible angles. Their eyes, black, hollow voids, stared straight ahead, unblinking. Then, in perfect unison, they turned toward me. Their mouths opened, and they smiled. My breath hitched. The entire bus was always staring at me. Their faces, if they could even be called that anymore, were stretched, warped into something grotesque. Smiles too wide, eyes too hollow. Their skin was wrong, like old wax melting under heat. And then, all at once, they spoke. Not words, not anything human. A low, humming whisper, layered on top of itself, rising and falling in a rhythm that made my skin crawl. It came from everywhere. Their mouths, Their throats, the space between their lips, like the sound wasn't coming from inside them, but pensé through them. The lights overhead flickered again. I gripped the edge of my seat, my knuckles white. I had dared to get off this bus, but outside the window there was still nothing. No streets, no signs, no landmarks, just a vast, endless blackness stretching in every direction, like we weren't on a road anymore, like we weren't anywhere. The driver hadn't moved. His hands were still on the wheel, his face frozen in a blank, expressionless stare. I swallowed the fear rising in my throat. Where are we going? My voice barely came out. The whispering stopped. Silence. Then, the driver tilted his head. Not a normal movement. A sharp, jerking motion, like a puppet whose strings had been yanked. His mouth opened, and for the first time he spoke. A single word. Home. A cold, paralyzing terror locked my body in place. The bus wasn't taking me away from it. It was taking me back. I lunged for the stop cord, yanking it so hard the plastic nearly snapped. Nothing happened. I stumbled toward the front, gripping the seat backs as I moved, my knees weak beneath me. The passengers out followed me with their empty, unblinking eyes, their heads turning in one perfect unison. As I passed, the air shifted. Heavy, stagnant, buzzing. I reached the driver's seat and grabbed his shoulder. His skin was cold. Not just cold. Wrong. Too solid, like stone beneath my fingertips. I yanked my hand back. "Stop the bus," I whispered. He didn't move. "Stop the damn bus," I shouted. His mouth moved first, his lips curling upward. The rest of his face followed. A second later, like it took time for his skin to remember how to form an expression, his smile stretched too wide, splitting the corners of his mouth. He turned to face me, and his eyes, they weren't eyes. Just gaping, endless holes, and inside them, I saw room 306. The closet, the darkness, the thing that had been waiting for me all along. And then, the bus lurched. I barely had time to grab onto the rail before it tipped sideways. The sound of shattering glass, metal grinding against something unseen. The world spun. And then, impact. The force of the impact threw me against the ceiling, then down into the twisted metal seats. My body crumpled awkwardly, pain exploding in my ribs and shoulders. The bus settled with a sickening groan, its metal frame bent and shattered, half submerged in the darkness outside. Silence. Not the silence of an empty room. A dense, smothering silence, pressing down on me like a physical weight. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was a deliberate, oppressive void, as if the very air had been sucked away. I struggled to breathe, each gasp sharp and shallow. The interior lights of the bus flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows over the lifeless passengers still strapped into their seats. Their heads hung at impossible angles, their eyes, if they had any, staring into nothing. I forced myself to move, dragging my bruised body through the debris toward the broken windows. Glass crunched beneath my palms as I crawled out, pulling myself into the cold, consuming darkness. My feet hit solid ground, but there was no road, no pavement, just an endless black void, stretching out in every direction. The bus lay on its side behind me, its headlights dimming, the frame sinking slowly into the dark. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. Then I heard it. A whisper. Low, drawn out, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "You shouldn't have tried to leave." The voice was familiar, distorted like it was passing through layers of water and glass. It wasn't the driver. It wasn't the passengers. It was something else. The darkness around me shifted. Shapes moved within it, twisting and coiling like serpents just beneath the surface. I stepped back and my foot struck something hard. I looked down. A door. Not just any door. The closet door from room 306. lying flat against the ground, surrounded by the void, its wood splintered and cracked, the handle twisted into a jagged spiral. I could see faint scratches on its surface, desperate marks etched by fingernails. I felt a cold breath on my neck, the same frigid presence that had followed me for so long. My eyes squeezed shut, my pulse thundering in my ears. I couldn't run anymore. Slowly I reached down and gripped the twisted handle. It was icy, biting into my palm. I pulled. The door swung open, revealing a staircase descending into deeper darkness. But at the bottom, a faint light. And within that light, a figure. Thin, hollow-cheeked, his eyes meeting mine with a sorrowful, resigned expression. William Grayson, the owner, the clerk, the prisoner, the man who had tried to warn me. He gestured slowly, his hand trembling as it pointed further down the stairs. I didn't want to follow, but I had to know. My legs shook as I descended, each step echoing in the suffocating void. The light grew brighter, the walls closing in, twisting into warped shapes that seemed to breathe. At the bottom, the space opened into a vast chamber, the air thick with the scent of rot and decay. Symbols, ancient and unrecognizable, lined the walls, pulsing with a sickly red glow. And in the center, the thing from the closet, no longer confined to shadow. Its form was almost human, yet profoundly wrong, limbs too long, skin stretched tight over jutting bones. Its face was a shifting void, constantly changing, never settling into anything recognizable. It looked at me, through me. The void around us rippled, shapes coiling and writhing in response to its silent command. The air grew colder, pressing in, crushing me beneath its weight. My vision blurred, my lungs seizing as if the darkness itself was inside me, rooting in my chest. Then it spoke, without a mouth, without words. "You brought me here. You let me in." Images flashed through my mind. Room 306, the closet door, the fire, faces of people long gone, trapped in endless dark. All of them victims, lured into its grasp. And now, it wanted me to join them, to become another face in the shadows, another prisoner, another sacrifice. The walls closed in, the symbols flaring with blinding light, the entity's form twisting into something immeasurable. I screamed, the sound swallowed by the void, lost in the endless dark as it reached for me. The world came back in fragments, cold air prickling against my skin, the faint smell of gasoline, a distant ringing in my ears that drowned out everything else. I blinked, vision swimming as I tried to make sense of where I was. The bus had tipped onto its side, one half crushed against the dark, uneven ground. Shattered glass glittered like jagged stars around me. The seats above me hung at an awkward angle, some ripped from their bolts, dangling by loose wires. The passengers, those twisted hollow things, were gone. I pushed myself up, wincing as pain flared through my side. Blood trickled down my forehead, warm against the cold night air. I reached for my phone, still somehow clutched in my hand. The screen was cracked, but it lit up when I pressed it. No signal. Of course. I forced myself to my feet, trying to ignore the nausea swirling in my gut. The bus's front window was shattered, providing a narrow escape route. I climbed through, careful not to slice my hands on the shards. Outside was nothing. No road, no trees. Just a barren, endless expanse stretching out into darkness. The sky above was empty. No stars, no moon. Just a vast, suffocating void pressing down from all sides. Where the hell was I? I stumbled forward, each step feeling like I was wading through something thick, something alive. The ground beneath me felt unstable, shifting with every movement as though it might swallow me whole. Behind me, the wrecked bus groaned, metal bending and cracking. I turned, half expecting to see those things crawling out after me. But instead, I saw it. The figure from the closet. Tall, impossibly thin, limbs stretched and distorted. It stood beside the bus, its featureless face turned toward me, as though it could see me even without eyes. And then it moved, Not walking, not running. Just a sudden shift, like it was closer without ever having crossed the distance between us. My breath hitched. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing strangely against the emptiness. The darkness thickened around me, clinging to my skin like damp cloth. No matter how far I ran, the landscape didn't change. There was no end, no destination, just darkness. And then, a shape appeared ahead, a door, standing alone in the middle of this nothingness, its wood warped and splintered, paint peeling away in long strips. It was the door to room 306. I skidded to a halt, my lungs burning. Behind me, I felt it drawing closer, the air around me turning colder, sharper. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, I saw the closet, the same closet I'd seen before, yawning open like a hungry mouth. And within it, those same twisted words, scrawled across the back wall. "Let me out." I felt a pull, something dragging me forward, urging me to step through, to cross into whatever lay beyond that threshold. But something held me back. A whisper in my mind. Not its voice, but Grayson's. "Don't." I clenched my fists, fighting against the pull. I couldn't go in. I couldn't give in to whatever waited beyond that door. But I couldn't run forever either. I turned, facing the approaching darkness, the shifting, smiling shadow that had been chasing me all this time. It loomed closer, its form flickering and twisting as though the darkness itself was alive. I took a shaky breath, steadied myself, and stepped forward to face it. I don't remember what happened next. There was no moment of impact, no feeling of hands or whatever it had gripping me. Just the sensation of falling. Endless, weightless. A drop through complete blackness. The whispers stretching into 1,000 distorted voices, each clawing at my mind. I saw flashes, room 306, the closet door, the passengers on the bus, their faces warped into grins too wide. William Grayson's hollow stare, his hand reaching, not to help me, but to warn me. And then, silence. I woke up gasping. Cold air filled my lungs like I had been drowning. My body ached, my limbs stiff and unresponsive. For a second I couldn't move, only listen. The hum of electricity, the faint buzz of a flickering light. I forced my eyes open. I was in a room. Small, claustrophobic. A single lamp sat on the nightstand beside an old bed with stiff, yellowed sheets. The wallpaper peeled at the edges, curling in on itself. The carpet beneath me was stained. I knew this place I had never left. I turned my head slowly, my breath catching in my throat. Across the room, closed but waiting, was the closet door. Number no, no, no. I bolted upright, my pulse hammering, my fingers clawing at the bedsheets. This wasn't possible. I had escaped. I had burned this place down. But the Hollow Pines Inn wasn't real, was it? The memories crashed down on me, fragmented and sharp. The bus, the crash, the void. Had any of it happened? Or had I been here all along? A tremor ran through me as I reached for my phone. My fingers shook as I clicked the screen. One notification, a message. Welcome back. My stomach twisted. My throat closed. Slowly, as if drawn by something I couldn't resist, my eyes drifted back toward the closet. The handle was turning. The door creaked open. And from the darkness beyond, something smiled. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The air in the room had thickened, pressing against my chest, wrapping around my throat like invisible fingers. The closet door swung open, slow and deliberate, revealing nothing but darkness. No back wall, no end, just a gaping void stretching into eternity. And in that void something waited. A shape, barely visible. A figure, too tall, too thin, its limbs shifting in ways that made my stomach churn. It didn't move toward me. It didn't need to, because I already knew. I had never left this place, not really. I had been running in circles through roads and cities and nightmares that all led back here. Back to room 306. Back to the thing that had been watching from the very beginning. It had never followed me. I had been dragging it with me. The phone in my hand buzzed one last time. A final message. "You're home now." The light flickered, the darkness shifted, and as the closet door slammed shut, the last thing I saw was its smile. The end.